Welcome everyone to Tea Time with Lee & Low Books. I'm Louise May, an editor at Lee & Low. I'm here today with two of my favorite book creators, Susan L. Roth and Cindy Trumbore. Hi Cindy, hi Susan. I'd also like at this point just to give a shout out to Christy Hale, who I know is watching. Christy is part of our creative team. She's the designer of all our collaborations. We've all worked together on several books, including the Sibert medal-winning Parrots over Puerto Rico. But today, we're going to talk about our newest book, the nonfiction adventure Butterfly for a King, which was published this past February 8th. I'm going to get up a little screen share here. And I need to backtrack a little bit. Here is the beautiful cover of our book. And as you can see, we see two butterflies and the word king. And that's an intriguing match. Could you tell us briefly what the book is about?
Sure. It's the story of the Kamehameha butterfly. It's one of two native species, butterfly species in Hawaii. And it's about an exciting project to conserve the butterfly that involves citizen scientists, ordinary people who collect data, and then a team of dedicated scientists who take the data and decide where to release captive bred butterflies. And the king is King Kamehameha. We'll hear later on the role that he plays in this story, but the butterfly is named for him. He's the king who united the Hawaiian Islands.
I imagine that most people who don't live in Hawaii don't know much about this butterfly. And since neither of you live in Hawaii either, where did you get the idea for the book? What inspired you?
Well, sometimes Susan goes first when we're thinking of book ideas together. Sometimes I do. In this case, I was looking to see what environmental projects were being funded in the country and around the world by governments and conservation groups. And the Butterfly Conservation Project, which is called the Pulelahua Project, caught my attention for two reasons. It met my two criteria for choosing a project. One was I thought it was so exciting that I could stay with it for years. So I just watched the project for a whole year before I even knew that it had a happy ending with the first butterfly release. And the other thing was I knew that if the chief entomologist on the project, whose name is Dr. William Haynes, was willing to work with us as a consultant, that all our facts would be straight. And we were very, very lucky. Will was on board and we worked with him through the whole project.
Yeah, it was really great that we had his cooperation as well as all the other people you spoke with. Now let's look at some of the illustrations in the book. I'm going to show you first a composite that shows 4 images. And then Susan will talk about each one individually. But I just love these illustrations. They're so gorgeous. And as you may be able to tell, they are created as collages. Susan, how do you create your unique collages? And how do you, did you encounter any special or unusual challenges while you were creating the images? Do you want me to switch now to the bigger images?
Well, let's take one quick look at the 4 together.
Whoops, sorry.
All right, because it really is the sort of the direction of the book. Starting on the top left, there wasn't any Hawaii, and it was just ocean and sky. And then, as the story tells, there was the volcano, which started everything. And then I would like to talk about the extraordinary foliage that grew after the islands appeared. And finally, the butterflies were flying thanks to all the help that everyone gave. And so now maybe we could go one by one and I'll
okay, sorry for this, keep switching. I don't know, my slideshow's acting up a little bit.
I could not possibly make them cooperate better than that. But here is the very beginning of the book. And the way I start, especially for this book, is to create the very background. On this particular page, it's a conglomeration of blues and greens, which is what I would consider the colors of Hawaii, and of course the warm sun. And then the next one when quite a difference. When that volcano erupted, it must have been some crazy scene, and from black to bright yellow and all the purple and the fire and so on. And that was a very dramatic image that I hope that I possibly did collect. And next we have, I think that the foliage is probably the most dominant of all the artistic direction that I got from this project, including the butterfly. I'll tell about the butterfly in a minute, but the foliage is just extraordinary there, and there are leaves and dark and light and different shape and millions of shapes. And in a lot of Hawaii, it's all one on top of the other. And I hope I was able to catch it here. Even more difficult for me was capturing the butterfly, because in this case, this is a very specific butterfly and it has to look like the real butterfly. And I often do not exactly catch the absolute, because it just is not possible. But in this case, it had to be very, very close. And so I worked extraordinarily hard from it. And fortunately, not only did I have photographs, but I did see the real thing when I went to Hawaii. And I almost could hold one on my finger, but not quite, because I'm a little bit scared. But on Dr. Will Haynes's finger, I did see it quite up close. It's gorgeous, unbelievable, perfect, beautiful. And the last one, when the butterflies did fly, finally, that's how I imagined, and above the islands, and there they go. Also, background first, because how can you put a butterfly on a blank piece of paper? You have to have the sky and the sea.
I want to just add in here, I mean, these are just the most beautiful images, but Susan works in a very unusual way. Did you have one of those sketches you could show us? If you have one handy?
Oh, the one I showed you the other day. Can you see this? That's a cat. Can anybody see that? I don't have a sketch from this book because everything.
That's okay. But what I want to say is Susan really doesn't produce sketches that her editor and art director can respond to.
Sometimes her editor thinks it's an outrage because they're so sloppy. And guess what? They really are.
And this is a little scary from an editorial point of view, I have to say. But we've worked together, Susan and I have worked together on several projects, and I know that her creative process occurs mostly while she's cutting and moving little pieces of paper around on her workspace. So I trust her instincts, and she never disappoints. This is the gorgeous result. So while Susan was talking about her illustrations, you probably noticed that there are two kinds of text on many of the spreads: a big sentence, a sentence in large type across the top, and then more text at the bottom in smaller type. Why did you format the story this way?
Susan and I do this often in our books together. We have a big text that will reach younger children. They can get the story from the artwork and the big text. And then the more detailed fact-based text is meant for older children to be able to read on their own. And it's interesting that you're showing these three pieces, these three spreads, because they really tell the backstory of the project. And that's that a group of fifth graders in 2009 decided there should be a state insect of Hawaii. And they voted, you can see the teacher in this art, they voted between the happy-faced spider, which is not an insect, which the children realized, and the Kamehameha butterfly. And they liked the butterfly for so many reasons, but one was that it was named for this great king whose coming was foretold by a comet. The other thing I want to say about the big text is that we try to give it some rhythm when we can. So in this case, we wrote it with a very loose trochaic meter. So it's years sped by and a comet blazed. And so we're not always quite in the meter, but it's kind of an organizing principle for the big text.
Yeah, I mean, I I think this is just a great way to tell a story where it makes it available to children with a wide range of reading and comprehension levels. So, as we all know, this is a nonfiction book about real people, real events, and nonfiction requires a lot of research and fact checking. So can you tell us about the research and fact checking that you did to make sure that we had a story that was accurate and culturally sensitive?
Sure. In this case, both Susan and I made separate trips to Hawaii so that we could interview Dr. Will Haynes, see the insectary where the butterflies are bred. It's a dedicated building on Oahu. See the butterfly exhibit at the Honolulu Zoo. I interviewed that curator as well. It's another of the breeding labs for the butterflies and a way for them to mix up the genetic material. I interviewed Hawaii's chief entomologist, whose name is Dr. Cynthia King. She was a huge booster in getting this project going. It was the first captive breeding and release insect program in Hawaii. And finally, when the text was ready, we worked with those two entomologists and a cultural consultant, Dr. Sam Gahn of the Nature Conservancy of Hawaii, to make sure that everything in the book was accurate.
Okay, so after you did all the research and the initial draft of the story, and Susan started coming up with her ideas for the illustrations, it was time for us to edit the manuscript. My files show that we went through about 15 revisions of the manuscript over a period of approximately 2 years before we felt that we had the absolutely final story ready. And that time is in addition to all the time that you two spent developing and researching the idea. So how about we talk a little bit about how we went about editing both the text, and then also it relates to the art as well.
Well, speaking for the text, first we looked at big picture things. Where would the text go? How long would the lines be? Page turns, that sort of thing. We kind of figured out what was going to be on every spread. And then we got much more granular. We started looking at every sentence. We started trying to avoid repetition. Oh yes, and we worked on the back matter extensively. The back matter was originally twice as long. I want kids to just know everything. It's kind of like here's the whole story. So if a child is wondering where's Hawaii, what did King Kamehameha really look like? What's the life cycle of the butterfly? That's all in the back matter, in the afterword. And we worked a great deal on that, just kind of getting it down so that it was manageable, so that it didn't repeat what was in the book. And finally, the last thing Louise does, I will have to say, is go through the manuscript literally word by word. And I do remember a lively discussion about a hyphen. Shout out to Louise.
Well, yes, I mean, we always want our books to be perfect, and that includes knowing where there should be hyphens and where there shouldn't be. But just to talk about the back matter a little bit also is that we always like to have a lot of supplemental back matter in our nonfiction books. Educators really appreciate this information, as do kids, because they always love to know more about the topic, but they also love to see pictures of the real animals, the real people, the real location, the real plants that are illustrated in the story. So we do get down to a lot of nitty gritty, and that applies to the illustrations as well. So I think this is your turn, Susan.
Yes, it does apply to the illustrations. And sometimes when I'm going through, we have minimally, I would say, 16 spreads, and one from the next to the next, it might get a little bit more abstract, or it might get a little more poetic, that is to say, deviating from the reality. And then I have reality check from Cindy first, and from Louise, and from Christy as well. And sometimes I think, oh, come on, you don't understand. This is just my idea, but it isn't true. And so I do have to go back, occasionally do a whole spread over, sometimes just pull something off the page and then fix what ever happened when I pull something off the page, but hopefully I was able to get back to something that is not taking away from the artistic approach, but staying on target of the reality, because this is nonfiction. And one thing that was thought to be very important was to show these little teeny weeny pieces of nature in a way that the reader of the book could see. And that's what we have on this illustration, because those are the little tiny pre-butterflies that we're looking at through magnifying glasses. And I had one page like that, but I remember I was encouraged to put a few extra magnifying glasses in to allow the reader to see better.
Well, I mean, as you can see on this spread, right above the right-hand magnifying glass is a little egg that would maybe just go unnoticed as just a little brown dot on the page if we didn't have the magnifying glass over the leaf, which showed the egg bigger. And because of that detail, the magnifying glass worked really well as a device to show those small little details. Susan, how do you, when you're creating, how do you work? What's your workspace like? What kind of process?
Want to see my mess? I know you want to see the mess. All right, here's a little mess. It's not this, can you see it? Yeah. How about floor? You want to see the floor? I want everybody to know that that floor is a more neat floor than usual. Sometimes it looks sort of like fall leaves before the raking, but
well, I guess, you know, with collage, you have lots of little bits of paper all over.
Lots of little pieces. And with collage, I'm going to pick up something like this off the floor. Now, this is a perfectly useless little teeny piece of something cut off from something or other. And it has this double-sided sticky stuff on the back, which is what I've been using lately. And what should I do with this? Throw it in the garbage? But you never know when you need a little teeny weeny skinny piece of turquoise for something or other. And in my storage room, I have, I believe, 12 big file boxes, and with a color on the outside of each one. And sometimes I throw these out, but most of the time they go into the blue box, the green box, the turquoise box, etc. And I come back to them. Sometimes they're reminders of books past, but sometimes they really have a new life in a new book.
And over all the books that we've worked on together, I have seen some of the papers and some of the colors repeat, you know, and that's great. I mean, it's great that you have all that resources.
Well, you know, Puerto Rican parrots have a lot of green and blue, and I didn't throw out anything.
So, okay, so let's go here to the next. Sorry. So, so far, Butterfly for a King has been very well received by the media, with excellent reviews, including starred reviews from School Library Journal and Book List. Yay. The book has also been featured by local Hawaiian media and by the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources. That was so helpful in the development of the book with us, especially working with Cindy and Susan. So this is a shot of the Lee and Low website page. And on this page, you can see the first circled item shows that we have a free teacher's guide, which has lots and lots of additional information, activities for school children, how to use the book with kids. And then the second circled item, which has a black screen below it right now, but if you go to the website and click on that little arrow, you will see a wonderful trailer for the book that was developed by Cindy and with music by her daughter, Dale Trumbore. And that's just a delight to watch as well. So if Susan and Cindy, I think we've covered most of what we wanted to say. So now maybe we'll move over to the Q&A, and Jalissa, who will read us some of the questions that have come in.
Hi, thanks everyone for coming to this Tea Time Talk. We're so excited for y'all to join us. We did get a couple of questions that rolled in from some registrants. The first one is actually from the art director, Christy Hale. What is your next book that you're working on?
That's a good question, Christy. We don't have anything on the boards right now. I like to say I'm waiting for the universe to speak to me. I'll continue looking at conservation projects around the world, and then we'll see what happens.
And I'm looking too, but I'm waiting for Cindy to call me up.
She'd call you up and say, hey, Susan, what about a book about such and such?
I usually do some sort of an outline and I send it to her, just so that she knows where I'm going with it. But she I think always
Sometimes
loves it.
it goes the other way, but you never know. It just depends. It's a little ping pongy.
Yeah, we bat everything back and forth.
I have a question. How many ideas have there been over the years that, you know, kind of you thought might have a possibility and then kind of went, you know, off to the wayside?
It's funny because we were trying very hard to work together on a book that ultimately Susan published by herself. What was the bird, Susan, that made the funny nests?
Oh, the bowerbirds.
The bowerbirds, yes. I just could not come up with a way to make it a Cindy Susan production. And Susan did this wonderful sort of meditation on how bowerbirds are like artists. And it was just exactly the right way to handle the topic, but it didn't work for both of us.
But a lot of the older books did, because back in the day, Cindy was my editor. And we had quite a collection of books that we did in that in that other arrangement way back when.
Publishing is so incestuous, right? I mean, there's all these connections among people that you sometimes don't even realize. Okay, I guess is there another question?
Of course. So we also got a question before the webinar. This is for Louise and I to answer, but are nonfiction writers of color considered published by Lee and Low? Yes, of course, if their work is nature inspired rather than having to do with ethnicity. So Louise, I'll let you go first and I'll go ahead and answer.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we want writers to write about whatever really resonates with them and that they feel invested in. And nature-inspired books are fine with us, as you've just seen, but we also like to have that human content. So there needs to be some human element to the story that can help children. I mean, children love animals and nature, but that human element also helps to get them to relate to the story. So it doesn't have to be an issue book. It doesn't have to have a big message about life. It can just be nature inspired.
Yes, absolutely. And on top of that, I mean, I know me specifically as a Black person, I would love to see more like Black folks in nature just living their lives. You know, there's a lot of writers of color who feel that pressure that they have to write issue books. And I wouldn't want, you know, writers to feel pigeonholed into, especially writers of color, to be pigeonholed into writing these specific topics. Of course, we have lives that we're happy, we're joyous. There's folks of color who love nature. And of course, you know, you never want to be pigeonholed into that. So we're definitely looking for more writers of color who write environment-inspired, nature-inspired books. So I'm going to move on to our next question. How many books have you done together?
4.
Yeah.
So the first one was The Mangrove Tree. The second one was Prairie Dog Song. No,
Parrots over Puerto Rico.
Parrots
And then
Over
Prairie
Puerto
Dog
Rico.
Song.
And now
Butterfly
Prairie Dog
for a King.
Song. And now Butterfly for a King.
Yeah.
These projects take a long time, so we don't just churn them out.
That's for sure. I think 2 or 3 years between every one is about our average.
Really,
Yeah.
how long are you? Oh my goodness.
Yes, and they're long books. Yeah, they have a lot of information packed into them. So, but I love working on them. I love working with Cindy and Susan. They're both so creative and diligent about their work. And
Well, we love our editor.
but you guys make my job easy. You guys make my job very easy because you do all the background work that needs to be done to make sure that we produce a quality book.
Well, that's very sweet. We also have to include Christy in this conversation.
Absolutely.
Christy has been part of every single project here.
Yeah. And she put a note in chat that she used to work with us at Four Winds Press, which was 30 years ago.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
As I said before, for an editor and an art director, and Christy's the art director, working with Susan's unique style, it's a learning experience that we've come to embrace.
Oh, that's nice. Put the whip back in the closet.
So we have one more question before we're going to wrap up.
Okay.
This question asks, how did you decide on writing this book, like they say in a different reading level, but I'm going to broaden that question to say, how do you decide to write a book in a certain reading level? Is that something you think about when you're writing your title? Is that something you discuss with your editor? What does that conversation look like?
Oh, that's a great question. And I'd like to answer it because I've worked in educational publishing for a long time. And I know the importance of, for instance, using Lexile to match up books and readers. Although as a writer, I also think that motivation is just as important.
Yeah.
But I do not actually think about the reading level. Aside from doing the big text and the little text, Susan and I work more closely on the big text, the rhythm and so on. I'm more of the details, the fact person. I just try to make sure that the vocabulary is very clear and understandable for that older child who's going to be reading the small text, the detailed text. And after that, I just kind of let the Lexile fall where it may. I don't really think about it.
Well, I have to add to that Cindy's text is beautiful to read as well. The heavy text on the bottom. The top it's more than an introduction. It tells a story and it would take a younger child through without any problem. The bottom is clear and it's beautiful. And I think that's very important, especially when you're trying to teach something that they may or may not be that interested in. It's utterly.
Or that knowledgeable about, yeah.
Yeah, I think of in this particular book, the big type across the text, top of the spreads, as kind of like the main idea of the spread. And then you delve into it more when you look at when you read the smaller type at the bottom. And as both Cindy and Susan said, we make sure that any kind of a technical term that's in the text is explained within the text. So we don't need to have a glossary or anything in the back that gives you a lot of definitions, because we try to make it very clear of what we're saying and explaining terms within the context of the story. So any more questions, or are we?
That wraps up our questions. So we're going to go ahead and close. So
Okay,
I will punt it
just
over to you, Louise.
Okay, great. So I just want to thank Susan, Cindy, and our moderator in the unseen person, Jalissa, for putting this all together, and to Susan and Cindy for creating this spectacular book, and for participating in this most recent Tea Time Talk. And thank you everyone who has stayed with us and listened to this episode. For our next Tea Time Talk, we'll have author Supriya Kelkar in conversation with editor Stacy Whitman. And they will chat about Supriya's newest middle grade book, Strong as Fire, Fierce as Flame. And that will occur next Friday, March 26th at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So stay tuned, everyone. And so long for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. Bye-bye.
Thank you.